now the animals, I use the reference, do you take, at a zoo conference, I presented this and I asked all the audience, all the zoo members, how many of you have a dog? Half of the people raised their hand. How many take it for a good walk, at least 2 or 3 times a week? And everybody raised their hand. Okay, how many of you take care of zoo animal? But how many of you take it for a walk 2 or 3 times a week?
0.
Why not?
Right.
Why would you do that with your dog and not your lion?
Right.
And so the idea is a dog can be pretty happy in a New York City apartment if it gets a good walk.
Right.
And so I use that analogy to say, from the animal's benefit, it's not just the exercise, it's what it sees and does. And I was doing an informal drawing class, and we went out to the old Franklin Park Zoo, the old Boston Zoo, to sketch the animals. And as I walked by the elephant house, I heard all this trumpeting and cacophony of sounds. And I walked in to see what was going on. And there were 3 elephants, and they were all fighting, but they were chained. So they're just slinging at each other and thrashing around, and the smell of barnyard and vinegar, and it was just an emotional, almost unendurable emotionally. And I saw the keeper just sort of sitting, with his arms crossed, leaning against the wall, completely helpless. And so, being pretty naive, I walked up to him and asked, why are they fighting? And he said, because they're chained. And I said, well, why are they chained? He said, because they fight. And I turned around and I walked out of there knowing what my thesis would be, and probably what my life journey would be, is solving that problem. There's something wrong there, and there's got to be a solution.
For sure.
And it
But you knew at that moment that you had this immediate visceral connect to the topic, and that obviously, okay.
And it was an emotional connection, not a intellectual connection.
Right, it was from the heart. Yeah, you kind of felt it. Yeah,
absolutely. And I realized, without being able to intellectualize it, that it was what we call an affective moment. In other words, an emotional learning, not a cognitive learning.
Right.
And that's really been the basis of my work, is trying to create environments where people feel the message. Like that, where the message is embedded in the experience. And that includes the animal's experience. Like what is the message in the elephant's life?
Right. Absolutely, yeah.
And then what's the message in that animal keeper's life?
Right.
In other words, I'm a big advocate for all the stakeholders. So, like my mission for my work is to participate in, or to collaborate in the design of sustainable and delightful environments for people, plants, and animals. So that really means all the stakeholders have to benefit. There can't be winners and losers.
Right.
And when we're constantly faced with these bipolar decisions, if you have to do this or you have to do that, I always say, find a third path. Don't accept either of those, no matter what people tell you. Find a third path that nobody ever thought of, where I can't say that everybody's a winner, but nobody's a loser. And so my thought was to come up with a Bill of Rights for all the users. So when you build this new display at the zoo, what are the rights of the animals that live there? What are the rights of the caretakers? what are the rights of the zoo as a business entity? What are the rights of the plants that live there? What are the rights of the birds that just fly through that area? You know, all
Yeah,
the
when you say
stakeholders.
rights, forgive me, when you say rights, you refer to it in a loose way of saying that the freedoms, right? Or the possibilities.
That's right. Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
so we did a workshop and we said, okay, and by freedoms, you know, another way to look at it is access to critical resources.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
So if you're a plant, what are all the things you need to thrive, not to survive, to thrive?
Right.
You know, not to endure, but to thrive. And so we made long lists for each of the stakeholders. And then we kind of overlaid them and saw which fell out for everybody. And we found, I'm sure I can remember all 5 of them, but you know, the first right was access to critical resources. The second right was respect. You know, if you're a plant, you deserve respect. If you're the bird that flies through there, you deserve respect. And so we sorted this out and came up with 5 overlapping requirements for all the stakeholders. And you know, if you're a business entity, you deserve respect. You deserve your access. And then we got to thinking, you know, we'd go in the back house area and watch the staff transfer the tiger along this long raceway. And well, that's pretty cool. You know, so we said, well, why can't that be public?
Right, right.
And then also I went to a primate research center, a primate sanctuary, where it had a really long tunnel through the woods connecting the old part of the project to the new part. And there was no public there. It was a sanctuary. And I watched these monkeys running all the way through it. That's pretty cool. So why can't that be the exhibit?
Right.
And also going back to this idea of trails, you know, a famous zoo expert, zoo biologist Heine Hedegaard, back in Switzerland in 1950 wrote a wonderful book about managing animals, a very enlightening book that's still a standard reference. And he's the one who talked about a territory is actually a series of destinations linked by trails that the animals habitually use. And they may use them on the ground, they may use them through the trees, they may use them if they're a bird just to fly from here to there. But as any hunter would know, if you want to hunt this animal, just find this trail and wait for it, it'll be there. And they don't use all the other space, they just use the trail and the destination. Right. And so the fox can use the same forest as the squirrel or the hare, just not at the same time. Use the same trail, but not at the same time. So why, again, nature's the model. Why don't we do this in the zoo? And so it became logical to use that to make these long tubes.
Fascinating. Okay.
Because, for example, the manga bee, this is a pretty good sized monkey whose name is Storm, and he was the very confident male manga bee who was the test, who tested everything, right. and you know, ran through these tunnels and to see how they could work. And he learned that this thing would vibrate at a certain frequency. This, you know, it's just a mesh tube stretched a long way between ring supports. Right. Has rings along it to keep it open. And he learned that the frequency, the vibration, he could time his leap so that it propelled him like a trampoline.
No kidding.
and he would just fly through this thing, having a great time. And then another thing that happened was, and Andy Baker, who was then the curator, told me the story that one time quite early when he was testing this flexible tubing, he started making all these alarm calls, you know, really very noisy alarm calls. And Andy came out to see what was wrong, and there was a dog had gotten on the campus, was running around on the ground, way below. He couldn't hurt Storm, but he didn't belong there. And Storm was doing what we call a mobbing display. Now, in the African forest, if the mangabees the monkeys that live in that forest, if they saw a leopard, they would leap up into the trees where they're safe, but then they would start screaming and yelling at the leopard. And all the other monkeys in the forest would converge and do this huge mobbing display to intimidate the leopard and make it go away. And so this mangabey in the zoo, who'd never seen a leopard,
right.
born and raised in the zoo, saw the dog and did a mobbing display. And I've actually heard these myself in some of my research in the rainforest in Cameroon in West Africa. I've seen the mobbing displays because they were, anyway.
But I'm sorry, just a very quick question on that, and we'll get back to the point. So the mobbing display is done by Storm, who has been bred in captivity, right?
Right.
So has never really seen this in the jungles of Africa. So what you're saying is that the DNA connect, which is built into their wiring, is like he saw what seemed like a strange thing. He says, all right, from somewhere, he was able to bring that response. Fascinating. So back to you. Thank you.
Well, so what, I mean, your point is well emphasized, that what you're doing is you're creating environments that facilitate natural behaviors.
Right.
They can do them or not do them. A major emphasis of my work in the last few years has been developing what I call animal competence. Like if I said you're a competent lighting designer, you're a competent architect, right? Everybody knows kind of what that means.
Right.
You can get the job done and you can do it well, and you have all the facilities. But what's a competent tiger? Well, in the wild, a tiger who can not only meet its own needs but reproduce offspring is a competent tiger, right? But what's a competent tiger in the zoo?
Exactly.
He sleeps all day, he's overweight, he has no muscle tone, and probably, just almost nothing between the ears in terms of intelligence, and no animation, no curiosity. He's what we call welfare deprived, right? So why isn't the zoo tiger as competent to take full advantage of its life there as the wild tiger is? Why doesn't it have the curiosity, the confidence, the swagger of a tiger?
Right.
The agency to make choices, just like a wild tiger. Now, it's not the same.
Right.
It doesn't have the same needs. But how can we design exhibits and also management systems to operate the exhibits that help the animals develop as much of their native competence as possible? And so a lot of what we're talking about is how to improve their competence. And you just saw how competent Storm was.
Right.
And one of the problems I have selling this idea is I show a photograph of Storm in this tube, and all people see is the steel mesh. But if I show them a video, all they see is Storm. They see his swagger, his confidence, his control of his life. That's what you see in the video, and you hardly see the tube at all.
Right.
And so anyway, that's kind of the story of letting them have the choice. Now, when the staff open the gate, Storm and all the other animals have the choice of going for a walk or not. If it's raining, they can stay home. It's their choice.
Their choice.
And then
You're
what
giving
they
them
do
the choice. You're giving them the choice. That's the key.
So everything we learned is life is about choice and control.
Choice and control.
Okay.
Understood.
And so choice, control, and competence. And that's getting into this other thing we talked about, the new freedoms. But in other words, if I'm designing a home for the elderly or for disability What do they need? Choice and control and competence.
That's it.
If if I'm designing a garden, a wellness garden in a hospital, which I did recently here, the patients adopt. If you go to the hospital, you have forsaken all choice and control.
Right.
You are helpless. Even though they do all they can, but that's just a fact.
But it's just yeah.
But the wellness garden, at least you can go out there and insert some competence and control and choice.